Metroid, Nintendo's landmark sci-fi adventure series, began life in the 1980s, being heavily influenced by Ridley Scott's classic 1979 horror film, Alien. This explains the game's heavy use of atmosphere and isolation, and also why the main series baddie is called Ridley.
Oh! Most importantly, it's the reason Metroid's lead character, Samus Aran, is a woman, drawing inspiration from the character Ellen Ripley. Anyway, enough introductions. Let's start this history video now!
Metroid, 1986. The first Metroid game was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System and saw players take the role of Samus, exploring the planet Zebes to destroy the dreaded Mother Brain.
The game introduced many series mainstays, such as power-ups that could be used to access new areas, and a large alien world that players could freely explore.
The game was lauded as being one of the first video games to feature a female protagonist. However, this remained a mystery unless players could complete the game in under 5 hours, where she revealed herself without her power suit. Oh. The game's instruction manual even referred to her as a he. How ridiculous.
Ultimately, its use of a female lead and its exploration-based gameplay cemented the game's legacy, paving the way for video game ladies like Lara Croft and Chun-Li, and influencing the game design for other games like Castlevania series and the Batman Arkham Asylum series.
And Cave Story. Captain N, the Game Master, 1990. Samus made regular appearances in the Captain N comic book, where she falls in love with the protagonist Kevin Keane and wants to madly have his babies.
Who?
Kevin Keane, you know.
Pretty out of character for Samus, but what the hey, we'll run with it. Even though Samus didn't show up in the show, her enemies, like the Mother Brain, did, and she was fug ugly. Ooh.
Metroid 2, Return of Samus, 1991. Samus' second adventure appeared on the Game Boy, and the first thing the developers did was to push the graphical limits of Nintendo's handheld. And push it. They did.
In fact, a lot of people proclaimed that the graphics were on par, if not better, than the NES original, with some noting the game's more detailed backgrounds.
This time around, Samus was to explore the planet SR-388, which was actually named after a motorcycle engine, on a mission to exterminate the Metroid creatures. The game introduced a selection of new power-ups, such as the space jump, and also featured save modules, which allowed players to save their progress. Obviously.
Critical reception to the game was mostly positive, although it is often considered to be the weakest entry in the series, with critics finding the game's bland environments and repetitive music being major turnoffs. Due to being the only grayscale Metroid title, one fan has actually dedicated his time to producing a colorized version of the game, which I believe he is still making. Here it is, in action. Look.
It looks like Metroid Zero Mission. Super Metroid 1994. Heralded as one of the greatest games ever made, Super Metroid was released for the Super Nintendo and was Samus' first foray into the realm of 16-bit. The game follows Samus returning to the planet Zebes to retrieve a stolen Metroid, collecting power-ups, exploring areas, and defeating bosses along the way.
At the time, it was the largest SNES game ever made, being distributed on a massive 24 megabit cartridge, and it took 2 years to develop, which at the time was unheard of for a game development, because it was impossible to take 2 years to make a game.
Safe to say, it showed. The game was massive, and its worlds were drenched in atmosphere, with some proclaiming it to be the pinnacle of 16-bit graphics.
Ultimately, the game was released to critical acclaim, winning many accolades and appearing frequently in many all-time greatest games lists.
Frequent praise was placed on the game's gameplay, controls, graphics, and sound, with one critic even comparing the game to James Cameron's 1986 Aliens film. Unfortunately, the game sold poorly in Japan as it was competing against the release of Donkey Kong Country and new systems like the PlayStation and Sega Saturn.
Sega Saturn. Thankfully, a stronger marketing campaign in the Western territories managed to make the game sell better in America and Europe. Ooh. Despite all this, a new Metroid title would not resurface for another 8 years.
An entire childhood gone.
As everyone at Nintendo didn't know what to do with the franchise. Nintendo approached another company to make a Metroid title for the N64, but they declined it, as they felt they could live up to the legacy of Super Metroid's legacy.
In Miyamoto's own words, they couldn't come up with any concrete ideas, and so throughout the 8-year gap, Samus was reduced to being a playable fighter in Super Smash Bros., released in 1999, and later its sequel, Super Smash Bros. Melee, in 2001. However, that all changed when in 2002, Nintendo released not one, but 2 brand new Metroid titles.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Metroid Fusion 2002. Released for the Game Boy Advance and developed by the same team who did Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion follows Samus as she gets infected by a new virus known as the X-Parasite.
She gets a swanky new suit to become immune to the virus, then goes on a mission to destroy said virus on the space station. The game continued the 2D side-scrolling gameplay of its predecessors, but this one featured numerous mission objectives, which made the game more linear in design, a decision which was both praised and criticized. Overall, though, the game received critical acclaim, even winning the Handheld Game of the Year award at the 2002 Interactive Achievement Awards.
Metroid Prime 2002. Samus' first jump into the realm of 3D was handled by first-time developer Retro Studios, who are based in Austin, Texas. Initially, the team were working on a number of different video games for Nintendo GameCube, including Raven Blade, an action-adventure title where you fought dragons with a sword. But ultimately, these were all cancelled to focus entirely on Metroid Prime.
The poor folks at Retro worked 80 to 100-hour weeks during the game's final 9 months of development, all the while combating fan skepticism due to the game adopting a first-person perspective. However, there was no denying that the finished product was definitely one of the best video games ever made. Translated the Metroid gameplay perfectly into 3D, immersing players into the exotic world of Talon 4, and surprising them with clever puzzles, screen-filling bosses, and tons of nifty power-ups.
The game went on to sell over 2 million units and received critical acclaim, winning several Game of the Year awards from several different people.
Samus and Joey 2002. This was a manga series consisting of 3 volumes which saw Samus team up with a chap named Joey, who surprisingly isn't from some weird anime but is actually a Metroid character. Very strange. The manga was only released in Japan, however an English translation was done from 2011 to 2015 by the Metroid Database.
Is that a fan base or a real database from Nintendo?
Database from Nintendo. No, fan base.
Live action Metroid film. Cancelled. In 2003, 2 producers optioned the rights to create a live-action film based on the Metroid property. However, the rights expired. A few years later, John Woo, director of Face Off, acquired the rights and was set to direct the film.
In an interview with Brad Foxhoven, one of the former producers of the Metroid film, he revealed that the film had Nintendo's full support due to being fans of Woo's previous work. However, the film languished in development hell as the production studio involved, Tiger Hill, were struggling to make a film under Nintendo's tight restrictions on the Metroid franchise. Tight restrictions that were imposed due to the critical and commercial failure of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. We all remember that classic film? I love it!
Early versions of the script involved exploring the origins of Samus and how she became the tough, lonesome heroine we all adore and admire.
However, since at the time, Nintendo didn't know what Samus' origins were, so they didn't feel comfortable with a Hollywood team providing the answers, and so decided to withdraw from the project.
Nintendo may potentially explore making a Metroid film again, but as it stands, nothing's happening.
So despite a long hiatus between the SNES and the GameCube, the Metroid series has had a very successful history with several critically acclaimed games and benchmarks which set new standards in the video game industry. So what could go wrong? I mean it. What could go wrong? Dun, 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 dun.